Hi everyone. It is 12:35. I am Courtney Taylor, the Digital Communications Manager at E4 Carolinas. Thank you all for coming today for our cybersecurity seminar for Plan, Prepare, and Communicate, sponsored by C4CS. So today's agenda, I'm just welcoming you in. Just do a quick little do's and don'ts. And then after that, Diane Chase from C4CS will give a welcome message, and then we're going to pass it on to our panel discussion moderated by Wayne. So some don't forgets, leave your microphones on mute while the panel is in discussion. This will help with unnecessary noises. But during the Q&A, our moderator, Wayne, will instruct you all when asking additional questions that aren't listed in chat. And some do's, use the Zoom chat to submit your questions publicly. And then also enjoying what you're hearing, use the reaction emojis in your menu below so you can actually let the panelists know that you're actually loving what they're saying, just like what Derek's doing. So let's get the seminar going, and I'm going to pass it on to Diane.
Thank you, Courtney. Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to have you with us today, and we're in for a very interesting and valuable discussion and program today with a panel of experts. And I just wanted to say a little bit about C4CS. Originally incarnated as the Center for Communication Strategies, our areas of expertise are working with client partners in terms of strategic communication, ranging from crisis communication to issues and risk management, crisis communication planning, preparing, and we do a lot of training. We have a lot of areas of expertise in terms of executive communication, coaching, and training, as well as working with teams in organizations. So that's a little bit about C4CS. We are so privileged and pleased to be the sponsor for these communications seminars. This is the last one for 2021. So let's make the most out of it. And I know that we want to make sure that we take every minute and make it as valuable as possible. So I'm not going to talk too much about anything else other than introducing our fabulous moderator, Wayne Wilkins. He is the CEO of Energy United and also a board member of E4 Carolinas. So Wayne, take it off.
All right. Thank you so much, Diane. And thank you, Courtney, for kicking this meeting off today. Just to repeat something that Diane just said, this is the last of three seminars like this, so do encourage everybody to take advantage of this. We've got a really impressive group of panelists today. I've not met either one of these gentlemen, but during some recent conversations with them, I'm very convinced they're expert in their field, so be sure and take advantage of that. Speaking of taking advantage, if you have questions that come up during this seminar and during the discussions, please put those in the chat. We were fortunate to have five or more questions come in from the participants earlier, so we'll deal with those, but also look forward to you folks asking questions as well. So let me turn it over to the panelists. So we'll start with Derek and ask these folks to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Derek Kolakowski. I'm the Senior Manager of Information Security Services at Foxguard Solutions. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of Framatome. I've been working with Foxguard for about 5 years in the power generation, transmission, and distribution space. However, we also expand our verticals into manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, gov, and a few others while we're at it. My personal specialty is risk management and vulnerability management. My history starts about 15 years ago, and really actually started years before that. For anyone who can remember Commodore 64s or Trash 80s, those are the very roots of my experience. So I'm glad to be here, glad to have been invited to participate, and hopefully will provide some level of both knowledge and entertainment for the conference.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Joseph, you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joseph Bonventry. You can guys call me Joe. I'm with Burns McDonnell. I'm with our Governance, Risk, and Compliance and Cybersecurity Division. Burns McDonnell is one of the largest architectural engineering firms in the country. I'm a managing consultant for our governance and risk compliance piece. I've been in the industry for almost 20 years, with Burns McDonnell for 8. Looking forward to today in our conversations, and hopefully I will provide some great insight to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Dave, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. Dave Deming, happy to be here. I'm with Duke Energy. I've been with Duke Energy for over 20 years now. My background is both in the IT operations, IT applications area, and of course, cybersecurity. My current role with Duke Energy is focused on cyber defense operations. So that's our 24/7 security operations center, our cyber incident response team, and all the tools and identity management associated with supporting the cybersecurity function within Duke. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dave. As you can see from the pedigrees of these individuals, they're clearly experienced and knowledgeable in this area that we're discussing today. So I'm going to start off with going back to Derek. Each of these folks have some individual presentations to make, and Derek, if you'll go ahead.
Sure. Are we starting off with the first question, Wayne?
Okay. We did have 5 questions that came in earlier pre the meeting, and the first one was, what is the current prioritization surrounding OT security versus IT security?
Well, either you're going to like my answer or you're going to not like my answer. Yes. The answer is yes. Unfortunately, in the world that we live in the instrumented world we live in the OT and IT convergence world we live in, I honestly don't believe you can differentiate the two from a risk and defensive posture. When we look across some of the more modern attacks we've seen in OT environments, some of them are direct onto OT equipment. One of my favorites to point out is a few years back, a casino who shall be named later was attacked through a fish tank controller. The attackers found a entry point utilizing a fish tank controller and were able to utilize it to pivot into IT environments and pull down a high rollers database. We also see it go in the other direction. For example, we have seen issues where attackers have pivoted through corporate environments to attack environmental controls at facilities in New Jersey. Tritium controller, I think, is what was eventually attacked and compromised. So we see both environments converging and providing paths inward to the client, and we also see both paths introduce significant amounts of risk, not just from data risk, but from financial risk. There's a fairly recent, within the last month, case where a Alabama mother is suing a hospital where they had been attacked and successfully owned by a ransomware vector, and as a result, the young mother's child died. The reason why the hospital is being sued at that point is it was found that had they not been currently being impacted by ransomware, they could have identified the issues going on with the child due to high heart rate, stress levels, things of that nature, and they didn't. And now we see a real world consequence where bits meets flesh, unfortunately. And we're all in a space right now with energy, with pharma, with manufacturing, where that's just a reality.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Dave, you want to add anything to that conversation?
Yeah. I echo Derek's comments. Duke Energy, being an essential service provider and one of the largest grid operators, right? We take protecting our assets and our information very seriously. And we view both OT and IT as important and prioritize both, right? We elevate the investments based on where we're seeing our current industry threats. And, the threats are continuing to grow, right? Both in sophistication and also complexity. And we really haven't seen any slowdown in this, right? As you've probably seen in the recent news. So, we're focused on risk mitigation strategy and alignment to industry cybersecurity standards, and realizing that we can never be too safe or too prepared for these types of events, and focusing on visibility, detection, and response in both our OT and IT environments equally as part of our strategy.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. Joseph?
Those great points, Derek and Dave. I'm going to try to spin this around a little bit and just say that I'm actually content with how much prioritization some of the companies that we work with are prioritizing OT and security and IT security together in their overall risk management portfolio. If you look back about 7-8 years ago, I kind of related to Star Wars. Everyone relates to Star Wars, the first one, right? Or episode 4, wherever you came in the timeline, and that. And right before the Death Star blew up, hopefully I didn't spoil anything for anybody, but this guy comes up to the general and goes, "Hey, their plan looks really solid. They can blow up the whole place. You want me to get an escape ship for you?" And the guy's like, "No, we're never going to be attacked. They'll never get us. We're on to victory." And then what ends up happening, they end up blowing up. But that attitude, that motif, for example, is starting to die down, especially in the C-suite levels, and especially in the rank and file and the directors and managers, a lot of the utility-based companies and the critical infrastructure sectors, which is great news for everybody, because as you all know, one of the biggest issues is prioritization with each of the executives. But now, as things are getting more aligned and financial risk is being evaluated with cyber risk and et cetera, it just makes a good, strong argument to keep things in an overall risk management portfolio for our clients and for everybody in critical infrastructure.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Just a follow-up questions from some of the comments I'm hearing. Each of you folks, our panelists, represent some fairly large companies. I'm curious, do you have an opinion on the exposure to this kind of activity from large versus small company?
It's a tough one. I don't know. It depends on how you're being targeted. And even then, I think realistically, it depends on your environment. So large organizations tend to provide juicy targets because you have such a broad surface and a wealth of data inside. Whether they're trying to get data, whether they're trying to cause harm, you have an impact. There's a larger impact. And so you may see individuals, whether it be all the way up to nation state backed attackers, all the way down to, I think, the fundamentals of people who are trying to prove street cred within their social groups, within their tribes. Large organizations, sure, great targets, but at the same time, we often see these broad nets cast across the interwebs, right, across the entirety of our compute space externally, with both new things that just may have not even been announced, or literally you're not going to hear about for 2 more weeks, to things that have been around for years and years. When we see the Verizon breach reports come out, honestly, one of the largest attack vectors, unpatched older vulnerabilities that are just exposed to the world. So when we see that, yes, as an individual, as a big organization, you are at bigger risk because you are noticeable, right? Everyone wants to take a swing at the champ. Smaller organizations, you're at risk because you may not be reacting as quickly as a large organization because you don't have as many resources. And in the middle, like if you do something wrong, if you do something that someone doesn't like, an example would be when I lived in Blacksburg, again, natural gas pipeline was coming through the area. It caused a significant public response. If you have someone with appropriate skills and has some sort of grievance, if you're a contractor working on that pipeline, you're not even who's putting in the pipeline. You just happen to be the name on the truck that drove past the wrong person's house. Now, all of a sudden, you're a target. So it's tough to be able to quantify exactly why an organization would be a larger, a primary target or not, or whether it be an accidental target or not. We would, and that's kind of where our ongoing risk management approaches, our day-to-day operations of evaluating what our threats are, what our risks are, what we're doing and how we're defending comes into play. And that's a non-answer, and I apologize, but unfortunately, I honestly believe that is the answer. But I'm sure Joe looks like he's winding up, ready to tell me otherwise.
Thank you for that feedback, Derek. You actually provided a nice segue into the number 2 question that we had. It came in earlier, was has there been lessons learned from the Colonial Pipeline attack been reflected in guidance and requirements yet? Joseph, you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, also on the last point, Derek made a great point, versus large versus small. One of the points I wanted to make to that before we jump into that one is that if you look at the SolarWinds attack, right, a lot of small companies use SolarWinds, and that affected them greatly on stuff. You've looked at the Microsoft patch that scored 100%, and the name is escaping me right now, that got patched. Again, a lot of organizations, large or small, like Derek's point, doesn't really matter. I think it's uncharacteristic. They don't discriminate when it comes to the attack. When they have a motive and they have an ideal in their place, and I think that's the point where you're driving towards, Derek, is that they're going to go hunting, and whether it could be Burger King or it could be the mom and pop shop, whatever their target is, they're going to be successful in it. Whether it's a small gain attack or a large gain attack, regardless, they're going to go for it. But on the Colonial piece, I think that's a great question. There are some standards and requirements that TSA has been put out on gas and pipelines and stuff. And there's been some, presidential, directives to get things with cybersecurity. The hard part is it hasn't been regulated yet to the point of like the electric utility space, where you have NERC CIP and you have the NERC registrations standards and stuff, where you must do this or face financial penalty, where it strong arms the prioritization of some of these companies to do certain things and such. To me, I think overall, companies are looking at that as a lesson learned piece. And again, prioritizing, like Derek was stating and Dave was saying, on how they can improve their overall risk posture and their overall defenses and such, and to learn from those mistakes. One of the biggest things I ever learned from, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with this, Microsoft way back, I think about 15 years ago, started doing active shooter training. Again, this is not related to cybersecurity, but one of the biggest things that they realized when they were doing active shooter training in their organization is people in the organization did not know how to respond to police officers. Mm-hmm. And again, that was really big because everyone was a target at that point. And it's the same thing with cybersecurity. Your incident response, how you recover from that piece, all those things need to be tested, trained, and through for your organization. I use that as an example to highlight, it could be as big as a mass shooting event, or it could be as big as hacking event or a ransomware event. And that incident response is crucial on how a company rebounds and is resilient towards its posture. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Joe, you bring up a lot of great points, and the Colonial Pipeline is front and present in everybody's mind. If you're in the Carolinas or on the East Coast, right, you probably had a hard time getting gas in the spring. We saw kind of our first glimmer of this with the Ukrainian power grid attack a few years ago that really elevated this issue and the potential impact to countries across the world. Duke's really committed to staying ahead of these. And like Joe said, right, it's important to review intelligence reports, review what came out of Colonial Pipeline, and review the technical breach reports. We actively review over 100 of these type of intelligence reports each month. Then we use that to feed into our life cycle and into our tools and training our staff. And then, we don't only just consume this information, right? We try to be good stewards and through EISAC, share intelligence information with the rest of the utility partners and, to help everybody kind of stay ahead of the threats to the power grid.
I think the point that each of you gentlemen have made is that this is not a topic that, and I know that the audience understands this, but I think it's worth saying, this is not a topic that you can read about, put it on the shelf. Okay, I'm done. I've covered that in my business model. This is such a fast moving, fast changing, ever changing situation that we're dealing with exposures and vulnerability. Again, the point you've made, whether you're a small company or a large company, everybody's exposed to it. It's a new discipline and a new skill that we all have to take on. So you guys have done a great job at talking about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may, I'm gonna put my bad cop hat back on, right? My response to this is, this really kind of looks and outlines a mentality differentiation between security and compliance, right? We often think of them as overlapping if we're talking about a Venn diagram, but realistically, the amount of overlap, I think, is a lot less than what is generally accepted, often at executive levels and directorate levels. Where we're really looking at is a lot of security frameworks outside of NERC, maybe NERC CIP does speak to this a little bit, but other ones, including NIST-derived ones, talk about, to what you just said, Wayne, this ongoing model of, I need to be aware of the world around me. And it's a day-to-day business operation that, like Dave was pointing out, where you're going out and you're collecting information about your environment, about what you're doing and where you're going. And then you're feeding it in and saying, hey, yes, I'm compliant with whatever requirements I have, but I seem to have left this risk or this threat vector open. So I'm going to create an additional security model, right, that says, hey, I'm adding this to my tool belt. Like Dave said, he's in charge of tools and people to deal with the ongoing, threat vectors to the organization. I'm going to add a new tool that's going to address this thing that's going on in the environment that isn't covered by my guidance, that isn't covered by my compliance, because compliances are late. They are lagging aspects of your security model. They are responding, they are reactive. So in a good program, and when I say good, I'm probably talking the Ferrari and Maserati of a program, where you're spending a lot of money to do this and a lot of resources. You should actually already be there before the guidance comes in, because you should theoretically, and again, I realize this is why I'm wearing the bad cop hat, should have said, hey, I see that threat and I see that risk. I see it maturing, right? I know I need to respond to it. I'm going to build a security program around it. And then the guidance is going to come around in months to years after the risk starts to really manifest itself, to where large organizations beyond just, an energy producer, we're talking about things like NERC and FERC and NIST and whoever else creates a net new, guidance paradigm. They're going to say, oh yeah, we should probably mandate that people take care of this problem. It's a big enough problem. What should theoretically happen is when that mandate comes along, your security model should look like this. You go, oh, look, I'm missing a little, I'm doing more than necessary here, but I'm happy with that. But I'm missing this compliance part, so I'm going to align. And it should be a 80-20 rule alignment, as I cover my face. Someone's going to yell at me for my presentation skills. I'm really bad at this. You're going to align it, not like, hey, I've got nothing and I've got a helicopter in this giant thing and drop it into place and try to bake it into my day-to-day operations. Again, that's my bad cop perspective. And security is, people ask me, like, when do you know you got there? My answer is, this isn't the Boston, it's the Boston Marathon, but it's the Boston Marathon if the finish line just kept going and you're running at it. Eventually, yeah, sure, you might actually cross the finish line, but then you're gonna have to run in place as that finish line moves. So it's tough. It's not easy, and we all can do the best we can with what we have and the resources we have and the support we have. But it's an ongoing environment, like you point out, Wayne. The cybersecurity landscape and the threats that we're getting attacked by evolve in minutes, and it's and policy and guidance and requirements can't move like that. It's not easy. And you know,
unfortunately, it's like the laundry. It's never done, right? I have 5 kids, right? So it's like the laundry, it never gets done. So it's like it's always going. But one of the things I think is stress point, I think that was a great point, Derek. But Dave, you probably can understand this too, is that I preach to our clients and our partners about resiliency, right? You got to be resilient, be able to, how are you going to bounce back if something did happen to you? You're not going to be able to protect everything. It's almost impossible, right? You know, you can set up the greatest defenses, you can set up the greatest offenses and all that other stuff, but how are you going to bounce back when you get knocked down? And and how are you going to react to all that other stuff? And I think that's a big proponent that I don't want to leave here with, is that resiliency is the thing that we should be preaching, right? There's a lot of time and money and energy spent on new technologies and how to synergize those technologies. And then you have all these competing priorities with executives and with risk management portfolios, you know, well, my risk is a little bit bigger than yours kind of thing. And you do still have some ego training to do. And the CISO is navigating, you know, he's almost like a negotiator at this point, navigating his way through, you know, the different managers and directors that to make these things happen through. But resiliency, it all ends up with resiliency. How well can you bounce back from that first punch, right? Because if you walk into the door thinking that you're never going to be attacked, or your defenses are going to prevent you from being attacked, you're like that general on Star Wars. Your Death Star will blow up. And how are you going to rebound, right? They didn't rebound very well because in the third movie, they decided to put a shield around everything and the shield went down and they still blew up. So again, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Return of the Jedi. But anyway, that is the overall point. What is your resiliency? How are you going to bounce back when something does happen? And I think that is a true measure of a company's security program, is their resiliency factor. Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
You're exactly right. You know, how to respond to an event, and you know, it's important that you tabletop these types of things and practice these. The last thing you want to do is get into an event and you're trying to respond or walking through your manual for the first time. So you definitely want to do this under friendly fire and under you know, blue skies, so to speak. You know, the utility sector and Duke Energy participates in GridX, right, which is a good example of simulating threats to the grid infrastructure and tabletopping what does response look like if there's a physical or a cyber attack. And you know, it's always important to tabletop those exercises and then update your plans accordingly to make sure you're in the best possible position.
And I think, you know, for like you said, Dave, again, where I think this one's probably a big long thread that we just continue to pull, like auditors. They walk in, they're like, look, a thread, pull. Security guys are the same way. It's like, oh, and then security at any company is a block of Swiss cheese. It's the best way I can describe it to people. Be like, what do you mean? Well, when you think about it, a slice of Swiss cheese, right? You've got a layer that has a hole in it and I can see through it, right? And the thing is, well, if I stack another layer, if I take another slice of Swiss cheese and I stack it on, some holes are going to be blocked, some holes are going to be still open, some holes are going to be kind of partially covered. And then I stack another slice. Sure, I've got holes, but eventually if I've got enough slices of cheese, like a block of cheese, you're going to have holes, but you're not going to make it all the way through. And the reality of our world and the types of efforts that we're doing is we got to hopefully have enough Swiss cheese put in so when someone comes and hits and sees the hole in the first layer, it doesn't get them through the second layer quickly. They have to eat their way through it, right? I have to eat my way through whatever cheese is there to find the next hole to move through quickly. And with, you know, organizations, the protections of how much burn time, how much time it takes them to eat their way through the cheese and then get through the holes is the amount of time you have to realize there's a problem. Numero uno, right? And then number two, figure out how to shut down what is going on. Number three, figuring out how far they got through that cheese. And number four, figuring out what next layer of cheese to put on top of that to prevent the next person from coming in, recognizing Yeah, I'm putting another layer of cheese on the front, but it's still got its own holes. As long as all the holes don't line up, and as long as you got enough time to realize there's a mouse eating its way through your cheese, you're good. But that's active, right? That's the active process of watching your environment, reacting. Yeah, if you're pulling out that manual, like Dave said, if you're pulling out that manual going, you're in a world of hurt, and that's not where you want to be. And you know that's but it's also the reality of the job we do. And that's what makes information security so tantalizing for people like myself, like Joe, like Dave, is because it's that constant evolving challenge, you know, not one and done.
Right. Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. That was very, very good. But let me throw a third question out there that I thought was a very good question from the group. And that is, what differences do you see in the area of energy over other industry? Dave, you want to take that first?
Yeah, glad you chose me for this one. Very passionate about this one, right? You know, if you look at the history of the utility industry, it was really built upon cooperation. You know, you visibly see this during storm response, right? Where you got crews traveling across the country to support a utility in need. And, you know, the kind of the thought process is a failure of one utility is a failure for all. You know, I haven't spent a lot of time outside of the utility industry, but I have to believe this is perhaps unique as compared to other industries. But the cooperation doesn't stop with the crews. It's also transformed into the cybersecurity area as well. So Duke Energy, you know, participates in a number of industry events. We collaborate with other utilities of all sizes. We share best practices and lessons learned of running our own cyber program. And the ESCC has a cyber mutual assistance program, so similar to what you see with storm crews. If a small utility or any size utility for that matter, if they run into a cyber event and they don't have the staff needed to respond to that, they can call upon cyber mutual assistance to get support in responding to a cyber crisis. So we continue to support these initiatives, these information sharing initiatives, you know, both the industry level and the national levels.
Great. I think there's something that Dave said there. I just want to, and everybody on this, all the panelists are aware of this, but one of the things that's happening in the energy industry and has been for several years, and it's going to be more expansive, in my opinion, in the future years. That is, our grid used to be what I used to call, when I first got in the business, it was analog. It was pretty much an analog system. Everything operated, you know, with pressure and oil, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of it's still there. However, what's different today and going forward is the amount of connectivity points on the electric grid than what we used to see. And so when Dave talks about, you know, the things he did with regard to the energy industry, you know, we're really providing more field of opportunity because the way we manage and do our business and want to continue to do it better, more opportunity for folks, for the bad guys to get in. So again, that's why it's so important of the continuous learning. Joseph, why don't you take that question as well?
Yeah, that's a great point, Wayne. And that's the challenge, right? Because the old analog way with, you know, oil and pressure and all that other stuff, there's not much you can do unless you physically go to that site and do something, right? And to me, that's great. But, you know, this, for security professionals like myself, this word convenience is like not our favorite friend, right? And it's, you know, it got more, you know, we started doing more convenience. How can we do more with less? How can I monitor my substation from far away? What, you know, and how can I save those O&M dollars as much as possible? Because it costs a lot to send a crew out to a spot and make that magic happen, especially in the electric utility space. But I think Dave hit all the right points on the head too, in regards to the question in regards to the electric utility space. Electric utility space does it really well in regards to mutual assistance, both on the cyber side as well as, you know, on the transformer assistance and all that fun stuff. The other industries need a while to catch up. Banks don't do this. They are very siloed. They have their own teams. Even the government provides a lot of different resources. They're not cheap, but again, it's good resources to work through with the FBI and, you know, and such. But again, ultimately, I think that's where things need to start changing, because a lot of the big, like the big industries like manufacturing and water's been all over the news. Like just a little bit down the road here where I am in Florida, right? They had the water issue and stuff where they started OT affecting, parameters and stuff on the water level and how it gets cleaned and such. When you don't want that stuff happening. And again, the more assistance that we can provide in the industry, the better it's going to be for everybody, I think. But I think David hit it on the head.
Derek, you want to jump in?
Do I get to put my bad cop hat on again?
But you got to move your hands. You got to move.
I got them in my hands right in front of my face. So yeah, I agree with Dave, the mutual, and with Joe, the mutual assistance concepts is really great. But I also like what everyone's hitting on with the digitization projects, because I think it reflects one of the things that causes the energy industry to be much more cautious than a lot of other industries that it would consider, peers in age and importance. What we see is this really high placement on availability, right? So when we look at the cyber world, usually there's three factors we're looking at. We're looking at confidentiality. This thing cannot get out, right? So an example of something that might be high confidentiality would be the 7 herbs and spices, right? If the 7 herbs and spices ever got out, the recipe to Coca-Cola ever got out, holy smokes, those companies would be very unhappy, because now all of a sudden their thing that makes them money is not going to make them money. Well, then we have integrity, things that can't change, right? One I like to say this is medical records. Would be really bad if someone went in and changed your blood type from being A positive to B negative, and you ever had to have a medical event that relied on that information. So that information being changed real bad. In the energy industry, it's the availability, something functioning, right? We make energy. We convey energy from a plant to a distribution center. We distribute energy from our distribution center out to our end consumers. So when we look at something and we evaluate risk to those environments, we go, what is the number one thing? Availability. Okay, what is the biggest threat to our availability lately? The guy who applied the patch last week and that took down that the router did a funny thing, that the firewall did a funny thing, which then stopped us from being able to provide power. And so we go, whoa, slow down, applying patches, making changes. That's really something everyone in the energy industry is very conservative about. So where we see struggles is the idea of again, we're looking at threats and risks that evolve in a minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour basis and require some significant amount of response, which could be measured in minutes, hours, days, months, often do not well integrate with processes that are meant to take months to quarters to halves to years. The timescales just don't align. And often too, the investments on things that might be able to speed up that process, as I again put my hands in front of my face, where we're thinking at things like validation labs, right? Investments where we're saying, hey, I've got this thing, I got a patch, I need to apply a patch to it and then make sure it runs right, and then run a set of tests and then be able to deploy that to a field in a method that says, hey, if I miss something in my validation lab, I can recover. When we're talking about a traditional IT-centric organization, like a school, like a college, a university, where they're going to say, hey, I can just roll this patch, and if it goes bad, I'll just roll it back. Right. We've all tried to roll back a bad firmware on an SCL relay, right? You know how easy that is. And that's a challenge that the organization has. And when we start seeing regulation come in, right, where we're talking about regulation being a lagging enforcement, we're seeing NERC-CIP coming in and saying things like, thou shalt patch. And if you don't patch, thou shalt come up with mitigations, and thou shalt evaluate those mitigations on a monthly basis. So we're seeing that drive and that push from the regulators to say you need to do these things, and we see the industry kind of saying, I'm struggling with this requirement and this historical mental state that is absolutely necessary, but I have to find how to make those two timescales and those two requirements of I must be available, but I must be secure simultaneously. And that's a challenge that there are very few other industries, I think, out there that have that level, because energy is 24/7, 365. There are very few other organizations, which we just talked about to bring everything back full circle, that have banded together to provide mutual aid, because there is such a availability 24/7, 365, 6 nines, 7 nines, 8 nines uptime requirement. And that's heavy.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. You said a couple of things there around, I guess one of the walkaways is a fairly straightforward one. It's not if we're going to be impacted, it's when. And one of the things that when we look at things like that in business, we have to ask ourselves, how do we protect ourselves? One is, of course, through technical expertise that's on the call today, but also it's something called insurance. We all look at insurance as being something that helps us, at least helps us recover potentially just financially. That may be all it does, but even if that's all it does, that's value. So the next question that was asked by one of the participants was, what part does insurance coverage play in energy industry plans to combat cyber threats? Joseph?
Yeah, so insurance is a fun thing. Again, being from Florida and going through hurricanes and stuff, you always want to have the insurance for flood insurance and for wind damage and stuff like that. But you have to meet a certain set of requirements. So first thing first is, if you do have insurance as one of your tools in your toolbox to mitigate your risk, and that's one of the options, right, is to insure it, right? As one of your risk measures, then, be wary of what's in your policy, be wary of how much your policy is for and what things it's covering and how and what kind of events and what kind of pre-position things that you need to have in place for that insurance to make happen, right? One of the things on the insurance is they want you to have some cybersecurity company on a retainer. And if you don't have it on retainer and you don't have it, you're not going to meet the requirement, and therefore you can't get the insurance. Again, it's that fine print reading, and it goes back down to the crazy stuff. But that's where our friend lawyers are here to do, and they work through all of that language. But you got to make sure all your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted when going down using insurance as a risk factor. But companies do have that we've worked with, and when we do cybersecurity projects in Burns McDonnell, we're actually required to carry cybersecurity insurance, and we have to make sure that it adapts and applies to the insurance that the company that we're working with as well. So again, those are things to keep in consideration. I hate having those insurance talks when you're talking sales and agreements, because that takes the longest, because that's when you get to the real nitty gritty and T's and C's and stuff. But yeah, insurance is a good tool, but I stay wary of that. Make sure that you meet all of the requirements that your insurance policy is asking for. And sometimes those policies are not enough. The covers are $1 million or $3 million or $10 million. Maybe that's not enough. If it's a large size company, that might not even be just the reputational brand wouldn't even cover that piece. So again, just think about those factors, but it is a tool that some companies do utilize, and just be wary of the T's and C's.
Great, thank you. Dave?
Yeah, Joe brought up great points. Cyber insurance is important to have, but it's not an end all be all, right? It should be part of a broader, cybersecurity strategy. And you really hope you never use it, kind of like your homeowners or your auto insurance, right? And the insurance policy companies, they really look at your environment, and then they price it accordingly, just like home insurance, right? If you're in a floodplain, it'll be higher. Like within Duke, right, we really focus on having multiple layers of defense. Derek talked earlier about the Swiss cheese visual, right? And that's very true, right? How do you have multiple layers of defense to provide security, alerting, and be able to segment your network appropriately to protect the business? We've made significant financial investments over the years in those tools. And we also, brought in quite a few security professionals to provide support of that mission, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year. So unfortunately, they're working through every holiday and every season. And we continue to look to modernize our tools and our processes, right, which makes it more appealing to an insurance provider. But like I mentioned, cyber insurance is just a small piece of the overall puzzle to combat cyber threats.
Yeah, that was great. Derek?
By my unmute button, it's only been, 18 months of trying to figure out where that thing is. It moves every day, I swear. Yeah, I think my initial kind of gut response is combat is a significant misnomer. And I think Dave hit that nail on the head. Cybersecurity insurance doesn't combat anything. I think it provides no increases in defensive posture. It creates no offensive mechanisms to test your security. It provides a comfort and a blanket to know that if something goes wrong, you are at least in part going to be made whole. But even being made whole, you're not even addressing all the areas of risk. Joe called it out: reputational impact. Right. The first thing that's going to happen is they're going to say, "Wait, such and such a company got breached." It's becoming more common and more understood that it's a when, but not an if. But still, depending on the size, you may never recover reputationally. And again, if your policy is not scaled appropriately, revenue losses, incident response costs, fines, if you don't disclose in a proper amount of time in certain states, particularly California and Massachusetts, the state's coming after you. FedGov's coming after you. TJX, which from years and years ago, they found out the hard way. They got called in front of Congress saying, "Hey, I've got cybersecurity insurance." Doesn't get you very far in front of a congressional committee. So, again, at best, it's a transference of risk and a mitigation of losses. One thing I think it does drive, though, is, as Joe pointed out, is when you get that policy, there are requirements to have that policy. And I view that as basically just another regulation, it's not even guidance at that point, because full well when something happens and that insurance policy comes to pay out, just like if you had a car wreck, the insurance company's going to do some digging, and they're going to say, "Wait a second, we required you to have these 7,500 things that you signed with circles and arrows and a paragraph on the back of each one be used as evidence against you. Please don't sue me at that, but you missed this one. So sorry, your policy's no good." Now, again, legal is going to be a lot further in large organizations than me and my, the fact that I turned a left when I shouldn't have turned left. But it helps drive some of those organizational changes for us as practitioners to drive up to the organization and say, "Hey, Mr. Director, hey, Mr. VP, hey, Miss CEO, we have to do these things, because if we don't do it, this cyber policy is invalid and we're spending a bunch of money that we're contractually required to cover that won't actually do what we want it to do. So we really need to do this." So it can be a tool in the toolbox, but combat, I'm not sold.
That's a really good point that you've made. And it all goes back to something you gentlemen have all said, is that part of it is just being prepared. And to be prepared, that requires you to know kind of what some of the what are some of the bad things that could happen or will happen at some point. So that really drives us to another, maybe a little deeper into the insurance coverage question. And this last question of number 5 that came in earlier was, what are the top countermeasures to protect an organization against a ransomware attack? Dave?
Yeah. I think the primary countermeasure or the first countermeasure is really the people, right? We view cybersecurity as everyone's responsibility. And those technology users, those people that have access to our systems, right? Those are our first line of defense. So we really focus on training them making sure that they all have annual cybersecurity training before they have access to our network. And this provides them with general awareness of our cybersecurity policy, but also just be able to safely perform their daily job duties. And secondly, we test them on that awareness, and we also test our systems on the responsiveness. So we're constantly testing our systems, both internally and externally. And we use the results from those tests to then improve our cybersecurity posture, improve our training, improve our education. And then lastly, we're always looking to propagate out the cybersecurity culture. It's a lot more mainstream now than it was even a few years back, but we're always looking for opportunities to educate our workforce on security awareness. And we use technology at times to help with that. But also it's important just to get face to face with our business units directly and ask them, how they can help us support the mission of cybersecurity.
Yeah. Thank you. Derek, you want to jump in?
I swear it moves. Yeah, no, for sure. And then and Dave stole my thunder, right? The first thing you gotta do is exactly what Dave said. Look for the way in, and there's generally two ways in. One is through the people, and one is through the technologies. Because in order for ransomware to work, it has to reach the systems to actually do the encryption and actually do the export. So things like phishing training, phishing testing, penetration testing, all of which Dave mentioned. These are the ways in that are going to be constantly poked and prodded every day, every minute. Doesn't matter what your policies say. In that case, all that matters is what your technology does and what you're training. We talk about hardware, we talk about firmware, we talk about software. We always got to remember the wetware, the human computers that run everything else. They are exploitable as well. Unfortunately, we can't patch them as easily as we can other devices. So focusing on that and then looking at models internally, back to Dave said earlier, you've got playbooks. So part of that playbook needs to be not just what you do in the case of an attack, is, hey, here's how I think attackers are going to behave. And that's tied back to our constant monitoring of the security threat landscape. Okay, we see them doing this kind of thing. So here's my risk model. Here is, I think if they got in, most likely place they're going to get in is a workstation, right? So that's phishing. Or they're going to get into something in my demilitarized zone, my DMZ, because that's an attack on, an external service. Well, where's it going to go from there? How is it going to get there? Dave talked about network segmentation, huge thing. A workstation of someone receiving email, probably without some sort of significant security mechanism, should not be able to reach a server, should not be able to reach an OT, like a relay or something to do with a pipeline or something to do with a manufacturing floor. Shouldn't be able to get from point A to point B. But we know that that's a bit of a soft answer because we all say, oh, it's air gapped, unless there's a lot of qualifications, right? There's always something, and it can get there. And modeling those and having those exercises and having that red team mentality, and red teams, generally red team, blue team is defenders, red team's attackers. Red team mentality is, how would I misuse this? How would I abuse this? Okay, here's how I'm going to fix that. And honestly, in this industry, we have a huge component of that through safety training. When I came in from the non-electric space to the electric space, I was amazed at how much training I go through about how to tie my boots, about how to wear my helmet, about how to consider my environment. Hey, I need to stop if there's a slip or trip hazard. If I'm going to do these things, I need to be aware of my environment. If I identify something, see something, say something. And that's the same model we're saying is when we have folks that are working maybe in non-security positions, but general IT practitioners, the training of, hey, in my head, I might be able to get from here to there. I don't need to worry about how I got to here, and I don't need to know where I'm going to go from there. But this doesn't seem quite right. It gives me the ability to escalate that up to say to someone like Joe, to someone like Dave, or their designees, and say, hey, I saw a thing. This is an enhancement. Maybe we should consider. And we as practitioners and we as responsible people should foster that and say, you know what? Just like we do with safety. Hey, I recognize you for bringing that up, and you are right. And here's where we fixed it. And here's how we fixed it. And you deserve, here's a sticker. Here's a $25 gift card. Here is a, whatever reward that we use for other programs for these types of recommendations and identifications. We drive that same culture. And again, we want the balance between noise and signal, right? We don't want everybody being like, oh, I want that $25 gift card. So every little thing I see, I'm going to put in, but we don't want anyone saying nothing either. So those types of things are the countermeasures that I see as most effective. The humans seeing something, as humans are sensors. We're used to the idea of sensors in industry. I can look, we're converting them from analog to digital. Well, we need to convert them from analog to digital to human.
Yeah, that's good points, Derek. Joseph, you want to add to that?
Well, I think Dave captured the culture piece without saying culture. Derek mentioned culture, and that's one of the biggest countermeasures. How do you develop a culture that's akin to what Derek was talking about, a safety culture in regards to security, right? Again, I'd like to tie things back to what people personally believe or do in the home, right? So when it personally affects them, they can understand and try to relate it to that piece, like, etc. Like, what happens if your bank account got compromised, and things like that. Just a story I'll share with everybody here. Like, my bank account, we were in the process of moving. We just sold our house. I put the money from the escrow went into my savings account, and then that account someone tried to hijack that account. Now I have RSA and all that other stuff on my bank accounts. And the moment, Wells Fargo recognized that something was happening, they shut down all of my accounts. I had to go in person. It was a lot of rigmarole. But just think about it that way, from that perspective. What happens if something happens to you personally? It's going to almost be magnified for you and your company. So how do you create that culture of compliance and a culture of security and within your organization that's akin to your culture of safety, right? You want everyone going home the same way they came in. I tell that to people, you want to go home the same way you came in as well, in cybersecurity perspective, right? You don't want to be the cause or the reason why you got encrypted and stuff. That's one strong countermeasure, is having that strong culture. And that's the testing that Dave was talking about and Derek was talking about. That's important. There's, companies doing it on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, whatever the periodicity of it is. The second point is again, it goes back to understanding that you want to be resilient. So if something does happen, how are you going to recover from that piece and part, right? So if your data does get encrypted, right? You have a bad day. Everybody has a bad day. What are you going to do, right? Is your data segregated? If it gets, encrypted, does it, is it backed up? Do you have a recovery from that? What is the loss? What kind of data are you exposed from an internet-facing perspective, and things like that? Because the people are getting a lot more sophisticated, and they're using old techniques. The Nigerian princes appeared again for love of whatever religion you choose to, right? It's like, why are we going back to the Nigerian prince? And it's funny, I have some friends who play along with these people, right? Yeah, you want me to go buy Walmart credit cards? Yeah, I'll go do that, right? And then by the time they're done, they're in that person's machine, and that's fun to do, right? From a red blue team perspective, but we don't all have that privilege or that luxury. But understanding your data, understanding how you're resilient to things, and how do you have that backup. And when you're trying to build that culture, try to relate that back to the person, right? And how they can do well, in not only in the office, but working remotely and in their home, right? Because with COVID now, people working remotely makes it almost even easier to attack our employees, which are our greatest asset, right? That's what people can't forget, is employees are our greatest assets. But they're also a liability too, right? Because they are the weakest link in our security posture. So understanding that piece and how to build them up and how to get things going is some of the countermeasures I would suggest.
Very, very good. It no matter what we talk about, what we do, it all comes back to us, the people. And if we're properly trained and we're properly have that as something that's important to us, in which it should be, then I think we're much better off on the entry side of things. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we take maybe take a bit of a break here? I'd like to call on. We'll come back and start addressing some of the questions that's come in from the audience since we've been on the phone or on the call. So let me recognize Courtney Taylor to bring us up to date on what's happening at E4.
Thank you, Wayne. And I've been listening in and I've been loving the conversation. It really sucks that we have a time constraint because if we didn't, I'll just let you guys talk until 5 o'clock today. But just a quick moment, just to address what's going on here at E4. We have some upcoming events. This upcoming Monday is our virtual annual meeting. Please register. You definitely do not want to miss out. Last year we were virtual. We tried to meet in person this year, but unfortunately that could not happen. So again, we're going to be doing that virtual. You can register on our events page at e4carolinas.org/events. Also, our big program that we do offer every year is our leadership program for nuclear, for our Carolina executive leaders, and then for our emerging leaders as well. It's our year-long program, and that will be in person of 2022. So please take time to register for that. Again, you can go to our events page. And then in December for our South Carolina policy, clean energy policy, and our Southeast Energy Law Seminar, we're actually going to have that in person in Greenville, South Carolina on December 9th and Friday, December 10th. So that's all for the announcements. I'll forward it back to Wayne and we're going to start off with the questions in the chat. And I see Diane actually has one question ready to go.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Courtney. Just a quick editorial about E4 Carolina before we jump into the Q&A. If I'm assuming everybody here is familiar with E4, but it is a wealth of information about energy and everything that deals with energy. So I would encourage folks that aren't familiar with some of the programs that Courtney talked about to go out to the website and take a look at that, because it's a very, very, very good opportunity to learn more about energy from every perspective. Okay, we had a couple of really good questions that come in from the chat room, and the first one is, this is to all of you. And this person's their initial thought was the idea of someone hacking to a company through a fish tank. I think that's what this person understood. Is that how? So the question really comes to, how could a company possibly recognize all of the ways someone could get access through a fish tank or any other mechanism? So Derek, since you kind of put that idea on the table today, maybe you can start out.
Yeah, I knew that would grab someone's imagination, and put on my bad cop hat again. How could a company possibly recognize all the ways someone could get access if you can use a fish tank? You can't. It's not possible. It comes down to a cops and robbers conversation. Who's smarter, the cops or the robbers? Right? The cops got to catch the robbers, but the robbers got to think of new ways to break into places. Red team do blue team. Who's smarter, the defenders or the attackers? And it's a game. And like in the old movies, it's literally everybody chasing everybody around. So you don't worry about everything, right? You worry about everything. We're going to spend years having conversations. You worry about the most likely stuff, and you worry about the things that come and we see more frequently in trends. So, one thing is, people are like, oh, Derek, that's ridiculous. No, I don't have a fish tank. I don't got to worry about that. Or I'm a professional company. I don't do things like that. The way TJX was attacked and was hacked was actually a very similar model, except we're taking fish tank, keeping a fish monitor, keeping a fish tank properly oxygenated, warm, circulating, all those things. And we replaced that with an HVAC system controller. The attack to TJX came from the HVAC subcontractor who had a connection to the HVAC controller. So in this particular case, in both scenarios, fish tank or HVAC controller, the question is, why does a fish tank have a path to a high roller database? Why does an HVAC controller have a path to a point of sale terminal? Why does a salesperson's laptop, a customer services person's laptop, have a path to electrical relay? So you start to think about back to playbooks, right? What's the attacker playbook? I'm constantly updating that. So I look at things like, how am I going to get in? Where am I going to do next? And then you start throwing up roadblocks. Back to the Swiss cheese model. If I have a mouse eating its way through my Swiss cheese, I don't need to stop that mouse right away. I would like to, I don't have to, because I'm delaying them and I'm watching what's going on in my environment. Hey, that looks weird. I need to go do something about that. I need to have built my environment. There's a concept of, we talk about flat networks, right? Everything can talk to everything. Super easy to roll out, makes it communications and IT processes generally really easy because there's nothing in the way. Versus the flip, which is very easy. Back to Joe. Joe said he hates the word easy. He hates the word usable, right? Whereas the flip side is I can build an environment where nothing can talk to anything until I go in and I specifically say, hey, thing A can talk to thing B in this very, very specific and controlled manner. Super hard to manage, fraught with challenges, super secure. Well, we use that model to figure out where it's a spectrum, it's a pendulum, right? We need to figure out, based on what our environment's doing around us, based on what the reality is and what our budgets are, right? And what our priorities are and what our resources are and what the world's doing and what we're doing, where on that pendulum we may swing, we may be, where on that spectrum we may be. And that may be very different depending on the technologies we're using. I'm sure Dave has some things that are super duper Maserati level and other things he says, you know what, my Maserati covers me in a lot of these areas. So I'm going to bring in a Ford to say, hey, this Ford is going to provide me a coverage for this hole. And on that pendulum swing, some things are way up on one side and some things are way on the other. So it's really having that red team mentality, creating broad spectrum controls that handle about 80% of what's going on, overlaying those and making good business decisions regarding the business risk that's being provided to you, and not worrying about every single little thing, because theoretically you've built a model. When a novel attack comes in, yeah, it got through that first hole, but something behind it is gonna send up a flag. It's gonna wake up Dave's SOC, Security Operations Command, 24/7, 2 a.m. on July 4th or July 5th morning. Generally, a flag goes up and Dave's team swarms all over it, catches that individual, stops them, boxes them off, and now you move forward and you make evolutions from there. But long answer, short question.
Very, very, very well said. Dave, you want to touch on that?
Derek did a good job with it. I think, what I could perhaps add is, you just have to use a risk-based approach, right? You can't possibly throw all your investment on everything, right? So you have to prioritize and look at the likelihood and focus your attention and efforts there. Perhaps there's some things that you can put in place so that if a fish tank perhaps joined to your network and picked up an IP address, it would protect you, right? So it's important to just know all the devices on your network, right? If it has an IP address, it could present a risk, right? And you should be aware of those devices, and you should be actively looking to mitigate any potential risks that it may introduce to your environment. Derek talked about network segmentation. So using the tank as an example, right? So let's say it does get on your network somehow, some way. But if you segment off your critical devices in your critical infrastructure, that fish tank, it may lead to a potential issue. It won't lead to a bunch of dominoes falling. It could be somewhat isolated. So there's technology controls. There's stuff like network access control, which really prevents unwanted or unmanaged devices from entering your network. So everything that lands on your network, you should be aware about and actively work to manage that risk.
I think that's a very good point. It kind of goes back to something one of you said earlier, and that's just be aware of your environment, be aware of what's around you. Joseph, you want to tackle this question?
Well, Derek and Dave did so it's a great job. I'll just add a couple of nuggets in here just to think about some things, right? To me, one of the biggest problems in the risk management portfolio that companies struggle with is asset management, right? There are a lot of companies that have in their whole sphere have multiple asset management programs, and not all of them tie and talk to each other. So, use a utility company, for example. The transmission distribution part of the company might have its own asset management system, when the generation has its own asset management system. And when you don't have that holistic approach of understanding what assets I have on the network, what assets are we buying and purchasing and all that other stuff, it becomes a larger challenge to understand what we have so we know what we protect and stuff. So that's the challenge where I think I would focus my attention on, is understanding what you have as you're from an asset management perspective, and understand those pieces and parts. And then Derek brought up a good point about a flat network, just to relate it back to the person, right? If you think at your house, right, everything in your house is becoming smart. I have a button on my washing machine if I need to order more detergent now that goes to Amazon and purchases more detergent for me, right? And I have, the refrigerator now, you can connect it to your home network, and you can, see what's in your fridge now from the grocery market, right? All this fun and cool stuff. But again, those are all attack vectors to that flat network that you have at your house. Same concept here for if you look back at the utility space, right? You want to make sure that, like Dave mentioned, you have the right network segmentation, that anything coming onto your OT environment or your critical infrastructure piece is not going to get accepted, right? Whether that's through, whatever blockage you want to use and stuff like that. But you still goes back to the adage. Do you know what you have in your environment? Do you know what's getting connected to your environment, and how do you portray all that stuff? Those are the big pieces and parts. But the challenge also too is what I call, it goes back to the convenience factor, right? A lot of people have want to know, okay, what are all my assets in all of my places, and can I have a tool that collects all that information? I've become very wary of those tools, because you connect them into your OT environment space, right? Yes, you're going to get all the information, what firmware level they're on, and et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't have that, and I'm going to use air gap and air quotes, right? If you don't have that and, really tied down, you're just opening up the New Jersey Turnpike to your entire environment. And that's just not where you want. So be mindful and all that other stuff when you're doing that stuff. But asset management, to me, should be part of your risk management portfolio. And again, don't make it convenient.
Yeah, there's one thing each one of you have said, and it was all very good point, but I think this last question will help kind of bring that to home. And that is that no matter how well Joseph, Derek, and Dave and their teams do what they do, somehow it's got to get out to the workforce. Somehow the employees all have to understand their role, and it is a huge role in doing that. So this next question, I think, will help us get to that. And this is from Diane. Would each of you share how your communications teams are integrated in your risk, cybersecurity, and crisis preparedness? Dave?
Yeah, so we have a tight relationship with our communication teams. On the proactive front, they help us quite a bit with awareness communications, and like I talked about earlier, helping propagate out the cybersecurity culture and making sure that our employees and contractors understand the basics of cyber hygiene and how to notify us if there should something arise. But then also on the back end, right? So they're very well integrated into our cyber incident response plan. So the two important people that I look for, on those calls with me when I'm leading those events is my legal team and my communications team, right? So they help us craft messages to the enterprise should they need to be alerted of anything. Occasionally when there's big events that are in the national press, right, they often receive outside press requests on Colonial Pipeline or any other event and just want to know what our company's doing and how we're responding to the event. So yeah, we have a close, tight partnership, and I know exactly how to get a hold of them if I ever need them.
That's great. Derek?
Honestly, a good communications team is worth their weight in gold, at least, if not something even more valuable. Bitcoin, I think, is where we're going with that. Realistically, when an event happens, or I'll start with an event and then we'll kind of dive back into kind of the day-to-days. When an event happens, I'm a bit busy. I'm sure Joe's busy and I'm sure Dave's busy. And we're experts in dealing with those or managing experts who deal with those types of situations. As you all can tell here, I am not an expert in communicating or speaking, apparently. So I need other experts to be able to say, hey, here's what's going on. Here is the black and white, as many facts, as much information as I can give you that I've toned down. I'm not telling you about IP addresses and network traffic and things like that, but I've toned down. I need you to put this into something that is consumable. And that, honestly, that might be internal communications too. Often I have to report up to executives internally that my communications team helps me formulate those emails. If I'm writing something to a C-level executive or a global executive, I want someone double checking my work, because man, I went into computers predominantly because they invented spell check, because I can't spell worth anything and I can't phrase anything very well, again, as you can tell. So I have a personal relationship with them that I maintain on a regular basis. I have a professional relationship that I have built into my response plans. Like Dave said, when I pull out that binder, which doesn't have any dust on it, I promise you, and I open it up, usually page 1 or page 2 says, hey, have you contacted this chief executives? Yes. Have you contacted communications? Yes. And then we move on. And that takes pressure off of me. It makes others feel more comfortable, because communications teams help formulate things that I want to say that are truth, and they're providing the truth, but they're providing it in a manner that is less distressing, which is yay for me. Less people asking me questions. On a day-to-day basis, absolutely, the communications teams helps manage my policy and program requirements down to my teams. And that might be something as simple as, hey, it's Information Security Week. We need to do something big internally. I want to project this message. Derek, here are some ideas that we have seen in our space, right, that are helpful, and here's our new tools. I don't have time, unfortunately, to go out researching those communication tools. I don't maintain those databases. I can come up with some interesting ideas on how to invigorate the internal base, but I'm not the pro. And honestly, lead, follow, get out of the way. In that space, I'm a follower. Show me the right way to do it. I'm going to sign off on it, and we're going to be successful, and we're all going to share in that success.
Very good points. Joseph, you want to close out this question?
Yeah, my wine budget was a lot dedicated to the communications team, right? So make sure they're well taken care of, both on a consultant piece and when I was a director of security for a large utility company in the Southeast. Having that communication person and your side as your partner is key to success, because like Dave mentioned and Derek mentioned, that internal and external communication piece is great, and they need to be able to translate you, right? And they need to be able to understand how you're coming from. I call it translating Joe, and the wine helps. And I'm okay with the wine budget being where it is for our communications team. They do an excellent job. That stuff, because again, they're the face of the franchise, both internally and externally, right? When they're talking to the media or they're talking internally to the clients, or if they're briefing the executive team or the C-suite team on what's going on and stuff, you want to make sure that they understand clearly what's going on and stuff and everything else. So yeah, wine budget is high with the communication team, but it's well worth it. It's weight in gold.
Very good. Very good. Well, gentlemen, we've got about 6 minutes left in our webinar this afternoon. So I'd like to call on each one of you. If there's one message that you would like to leave the audience around this topic, you've got about a minute apiece. Derek, I'll start with you. 1 minute apiece.
Absolutely. I'm going to steal from Joe and I'm going to steal from Dave. We need to, as an organization, we need to destigmatize having a bad day, right? And we need to develop playbooks for the individuals when they do have a bad day, because that increases the likelihood that folks like us are going to know about a problem as fast as possible with as much mitigation as possible it doesn't have to be, it's following a process. And and that doesn't mean there aren't consequences. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean saying, oh no, they're there, it's fine. No, there can be consequences from having a bad day, as we all know, and that's unfortunate. But the faster someone says, hey, I made a mistake and I followed your playbook and here's where we are, and it's 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. Again, we're having that time scale conversation. The time between event and response, if I can compress that, that's beautiful. Bring that to me. I'll work with that. We'll help learn. We'll do better next time. But I got to know.
Great. Good. Very good point. Dave, what's your...
Yeah, so we've talked a lot today about just planning and preparing, making sure that you have a plan in case you have any kind of cyber issues. Make sure you train your staff to be aware of potential cyber issues. And then, the next point would be, make sure, you have good controls in place, but you can't fix everything, right? So you have to have a risk-based approach, and you need to prioritize your investments and where you spend your time and attention, because you can't cover everything. And then, lean on your industry partners. We talked about that quite a bit. There's lots of resources out there for you. In both the utility industry, but we have tight partnerships with the government and the FBI and others that are all willing to help. So lean on your industry partners wherever you can to support you as well.
Good advice. Joseph?
I'll wrap it up saying we're all in this together. Don't forget that. That's one of the biggest pieces here. This can happen to anybody, and knowing that and knowing who to call is important, and also being resilient. Understanding your program, like Derek and Dave has been mentioning, understanding your program, understanding how you are going to respond and is important. And just being resilient, I think, is the most important piece coming out of this. Communicate early and often, and being resilient, I think you'll do okay.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Well, I want to personally thank each one of the panelists for your willingness to share your wealth of knowledge and your wealth of experience to the audience today. This has been tremendous. I spent a lot of time with our IT professionals in our organization, and a lot of the things that you talked about today, I hear from our group as well. So that really is refreshing to me, is from our organization perspective. So I want to thank each of you in the audience for the questions you've asked. I think we've had a very productive discussion here today, and it was a great discussion from my perspective. So I'm going to turn it back over to Diane as our sponsor, and if she has any closing comments.
This has been absolutely fantastic, and the wealth of insights and wisdom from all of you. I really feel like the power of that collaborative piece, depending on partnerships, as you said, and developing relationships throughout the year, throughout the organization, because as we say, it's a Venn diagram for success. Managerial response, operational response, and communication response. And working together, you can mitigate issues and risk and crises. But it takes preparedness and planning and training and all of that agility that I heard as well. So thank you all ever so much. It has been such a pleasure sponsoring these seminars throughout 2021. We look forward to 2022 and hopefully seeing you all next year for the Communications Seminar Series.
Thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you. You all take care.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks. You too.